again, Mark here from TalkingBass. Last week we looked at some melodic devices with a lesson taken from the new Ultimate Music Theory for Bass course. We looked at how you can use scale notes around the chord tones to create bass lines and music in general. This week we're going to follow up with a look at how we can use chromatic notes in bass lines and melodies. Now, obviously, when it comes to chromatic notes, you can't just use a chromatic scale and hope for the best. If you're playing through a chord progression, the chord tones are our consonant notes. That's the framework that we use as our go-to notes. Everything else, scales and chromatic notes, work around those chord tones, and melodic devices are the key to incorporating them with purpose and musicality. This is the kind of music theory that will change how you play, and it's the key to understanding how players like Jamerson created those amazing Motown bass lines. Like I said, this lesson is taken from Volume 2 of the Ultimate Music Theory for Bass course over at the TalkingBass website. It takes you from the absolute basics of music theory all the way through to advanced jazz harmony. So it's pretty much kindergarten to university level in one huge course. The course is on sale with a big discount for the next week, so if you want to learn music theory and how it applies to your bass, go grab a bargain while you can. And without further ado, let's get chromatic. Now we've looked at some melodic devices using diatonic notes of the key, we can bring chromatic notes into play, and the cool thing here is that we can just use exactly the same devices as before, but we just fill in the gaps between the scale notes. As long as we're working around that chord tone framework, the consonant notes of each chord, everything will work out fine. This is how we're able to make use of every note of the chromatic scale over any chord while still outlining that harmony. So first let's look at the C major scale and add some chromatic notes into the mix. So let's take a basic C major scale here at the 3rd fret of the A string. So you should all know that major scale. Chromatic notes basically fill in the gaps between the scale degrees. So let's add them in one at a time over a basic held C major chord here on the track. So there's our C major chord, just a C major triad. So first of all, let's try working up and down through the C major scale. So. Okay. So now let's work through each of the chromatic notes in turn. So first of all, we'll add a chromatic note between the C and the D. So this is the C sharp. So this is between the root and the second. Next we can add one between the 2nd and the 3rd, so this is going to be the D sharp, so. And down. Now we can add one between the F and the G, so between the 4th and the 5th, so this is going to be the F sharp. And down. Now we can add one between the 5th and the 6th. This is going to be the G sharp. So. And down. And finally we can add one between the 6th and the 7th. So this is going to be the B flat or A sharp. D, 4. And down. So notice how because we placed those between the scale notes in passing, we didn't linger on any of them, they worked in there. We were still pretty much outlining the harmony, we were outlining the scale, and the chromatic notes just fit right in there. Now, if we were to land on, let's say, a D flat and just hold it, that's when you're going to have problems. But because we're using tension and resolution, we're passing between them, everything works out fine. Now, there are certain ones that work better than others in certain directions because it always works to move into a chord tone a little bit better. So, for instance, if we're coming down, that D flat between the D and the C works very nicely because we're leading in, but if we were to come up through there with the C sharp, it doesn't work quite as well because we're leading into a non-chord tone, into the 2nd. Same when we come up through E, F, F sharp to G. That works fine because we're leading into the G, the chord tone, but when we come down, we're leading into the F, which is a non-chord tone. So, you know, they still work to some extent, but they do work generally better in terms of the resolution when you're leading into a chord tone with a chromatic note. So now let's try 6 different lines that make use of chromatic passing notes over that rhythm track of C major. And we're going to pay special attention to the phrasing here to ensure the chord tones are highlighted at every stage. So those lines were in keeping with what I just mentioned about chromatic notes moving smoothly into chord tones. So as I rise from the C up to the E, I used the D sharp to lead into the E. And when I was dropping down from the C, I used the A flat there to lead into the G rather than the B flat, which would have led into the A. So that's just an example of how you can make use of them in leading into chord tones. It's also worth pointing out here the use of the sharps and flats in the written music. In Volume 1, we looked at the harmonic and melodic chromatic scales and how the type of writing would influence the way that we notate those chromatic notes. Now, in previous lessons, we've mainly used the harmonic chromatic scale because we've been focusing more on the harmony. So we would write the chromatic notes in there based on the chord, the notes of the chord. But the writing of these chromatic devices, these melodic devices, is a good demonstration of the melodic chromatic scale in effect. We're using sharps in ascent and flats in descent for the accidentals. So now we can try those lines with the C major 7 chord, and this time we're going to be leading into the 7th with the chromatic notes. So there's our C major 7. Let's try the lines. Leads nicely down into the C. And obviously we can try these lines over any kind of chord quality. So now let's try those same lines but adapted to a C7 chord. So there's our C7 chord. So first of all, just try playing the arpeggio just to acclimatise to that chord. 3, 4. So we've got that minor 7th up on the top. Now let's try those melodic devices. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So there we had a slight difference moving into the flat 7, which I played there on the D string just to make things a little bit easier. So that's just filling in all the gaps there between the G and the B flat. So we've got G, G sharp, A, B flat. And then as we drop down, we can come down through the A flat. And again, when we get to the bottom, we can use D, D flat, C to lead into the tonic. And we can also try playing over a minor 7 chord. Now, this is going to be slightly different. So as we work up from the root note to the minor 3rd there, so this is on a C minor 7, we can work up, filling in the gap between the C and the D. There's no other place that you can put a chromatic note in there. Then when we work up from the E flat, what I'm going to do here from the 3rd to lead into the 5th is just use the chromatic note between the 4th and the 5th rather than using the major 3rd in there. So it's going to be the minor 3rd, then the 4th, then the sharp 4th, leading into the 5th. Then exactly the same move as we had on the C7, from the 5th up to the flat 7 and back. And then as we come back down, I'm going to use that major 3rd this time. So G, F, and then what you would class as an F flat, but let's just say E natural there, leading into the E flat. So we've got a chromatic note leading up into the G there. So we're using the F sharp, but on the descent, I'm using that E natural to lead back down into the E flat. So there's our C minor 7. Just play the arpeggio first, just to acclimatise. 1, 2, 3, 4. those little melodic devices. 1, 2, 3, 4. Descent. Okay. So now let's just look at a quick 2-bar funk line making use of chromatic passing notes implying a C7 chord. So the line sounds like this. So this line is working around a C7 arpeggio. And we begin with 2 Cs and then come up through D, D sharp to the E. So this is the same melodic device that we just used. And then we continue up, F, F sharp, G. So again, we're making use of the chromatic passing notes that we tried in the exercise. So, and then we just play 3 hits on that G at the 5th fret of the D string on offbeat 16th notes. So we've got, then we play A and back to the G, so 2nd fret G string back to the 5th fret on the D string, so, and then use chromatic passing note again between the B flat and the C, so this is going to be the B natural, so. And then we start the descent, so we play the C twice, and then we come down through B flat and A, and then we have G, G flat, F, down to the E. So again, using that melodic device that we just looked at, those passing notes, the chromatic passing notes. So, and then again, we've got those offbeat 16th notes on the E. So. And then the D there, the 2nd of the scale, back up to the E, and then we come down through the D, D flat, leading into the C. So again, chromatic passing notes. So, and notice how when we play around on that E there, that is the that's the chord tone. That's the 3rd of the chord. So at every point here, we're outlining the chord tones. We're really emphasizing the chord tones in there. And then leading into the tonic at the end. So again, slowly through that line, 1 E yander, 2 E yander, 3 E yander, 4 E yander. So that line demonstrates how these chromatic passing notes work alongside the scale and the chord tones in creating a cool, funky bass line. It only works because we're using the chord tones as our framework. So now let's just quickly look at some other chromatic devices. I'll skip over neighbor notes because they're not too common. You know, chromatic neighbor notes, you might get them in jazz improvisation, you know, soloing, but they're not too common in bass lines. But feel free to try them out. Instead, I'm going to look at chromatic approach notes, and then we can look at enclosures, which are closely related. So let's take a 1-6-2-5 in the key of C major using 7th chords. This is going to be C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, and G7. And we'll start by just playing root notes with a basic comping pattern around those chords, and we can also try out the arpeggios. So next, let's try out our diatonic approach notes that we looked at in the previous lesson. So remember, after the C, if we're going to lead into the A, the approach note to the A is either going to be the B or the G. It's just the next scale note above or below. Then for the D, it's either going to be the E or the C, and then for the G, it's either going to be the A or the F. You just look at the next scale tone above or below and lead into it, okay? So we'll try again with the backing track, and I'm going to lead in from above and then from below. So that's diatonic approach. To create chromatic approach notes, we simply fill in those gaps. So this is really easy to do because we just play the two notes above or below the target chord. So if we're approaching A minor 7 from C, we can play either B, B flat, then the A, or G, G sharp, A. We just take the two frets above or below. So approaching the D minor 7, we can come down from E, E, E flat, D, or from below, C, C sharp, D. It's actually easier than playing the diatonic approach because you literally look up or down two frets and then just fill in the gaps. Or easy. So let's try those chromatic approaches from above and then below over our backing track. A chromatic enclosure is a combination of both upper and lower approaches, and there are quite a few ways to create them. One obvious way is to just play a half step above and below the target. So in approaching a C, we could play D flat, B, and then C, or B, D flat, C. But that's a very, very chromatic way of playing, you know. And that way of enclosing a target note is used a lot more in jazz improvisation. There's a lot of tension in those chromatic notes, so they're better suited to things like bebop jazz lines. That's not to say you can't use them in bass lines. You can, you just have to be very tasteful and careful with how you use them. The more useful enclosures include diatonic scale notes in there too. So in enclosing that C note, again, we could use the chromatic approach from above. So we could play D, D flat, and then maybe the B to the C, or we could play D and then B flat, B, C, or we could play D, D flat, B, C. There's many, many different ways to create these enclosures. So instead of working through every possible combination, we'll just use one particular enclosure here and run it through that chord progression. So what we're going to use is chromatic approach from above, and then we'll play a half step below the target and then back in. So we're on the target. So for the A, if we're approaching the A there, we're going to play B, B flat, then the G sharp leading into the A. So we've got the diatonic note above, and then we've got a chromatic approach or enclosure around it. So B, B flat, G sharp, A. Then for the D minor, it's going to be E, E flat, C sharp, D. For the G, it's going to be A flat, F sharp for the G, and then for the C, D, D flat, B, C. So that works really well over all of these chords. Now, obviously, it's going to sound pretty dull playing the same melodic devices over every single chord like we have here. So, you know, running that same enclosure through the whole thing, it just doesn't sound particularly good. So the idea here is to actually learn how they sound, and then you can employ them in any way you see fit. As you're playing through, improvising over a chord progression, you can just place these things in there. The idea is to actually learn how they sound, learn how that enclosure sounds, learn how the chromatic approaches sound, and just start using them a lot over things like backing tracks, just putting them in there until they just feel like second nature, so that you don't have to think. It should be an intuitive, instinctive way of playing. So when you play, instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to now play, you know, this chromatic approach, it just falls off the fingers. So if you're playing from, you're basically singing through the instrument. You know that the B, B flat into the A sounds like that. You're building vocabulary. You know how that sounds. So, like I say, you're just speaking through the instrument. So that's just a little insight into chromaticism and how we can make use of it in melodic writing. We've focused here on the bass line application, but all of these devices can be used in melody writing and improvisation. In the next lesson, we'll look at a little melodic analysis of some of these lines.